Okay, so you want to own a hardware store. Shelves stocked with nuts, bolts, and paint cans, loyal neighborhood customers who've shopped there for decades, and a business that feels recession-proof, because people always need to fix something. Sounds simple. It is not simple. Here's the problem. Almost none of that is how this business actually works. And by the end of this, you'll understand why independent hardware stores have been disappearing for decades, despite seeming like one of the most stable businesses in America. Let's start with the entry fee, because buying or opening a hardware store involves far more than stocking some shelves. A mid-size independent hardware store, something in the 8,000 to 15,000 square foot range, carrying a genuinely useful inventory selection, typically requires $800,000 to $2 million in total startup capital, including real estate or lease build-out, fixtures, and initial inventory. And inventory is where new owners consistently underestimate the true cost, because a hardware store needs to stock 30,000 to 50,000 individual SKUs to be genuinely useful to customers, ranging from common items to obscure fasteners someone needs exactly once, and carrying that breadth of inventory ties up $400,000 to $900,000 in working capital sitting on shelves before you've made a single sale. Most independent stores solve the buying power problem by joining a cooperative like Ace or True Value, which requires a membership buy-in of $15,000 to $50,000 plus ongoing fees, but grants access to distribution and pricing that would otherwise be impossible to negotiate as a standalone store competing against national chains. Add point-of-sale systems, initial marketing, and staff training before opening day, and you're looking at real total capital deployment of $900,000 to $2.2 million before your doors open. Here's the first trap almost nobody sees coming. Hardware store inventory carries brutal carrying costs because of the sheer breadth required, and a meaningful percentage of your SKUs, often 20 to 30%, will sell so infrequently that you're essentially warehousing dead capital on the chance a customer needs that specific item. Independent stores can't match the inventory turnover rates of big box competitors, precisely because being genuinely useful to a neighborhood means stocking things that turn over once or twice a year, rather than only the fast-moving items a Home Depot would prioritize. New owners who try to trim inventory to improve cash flow quickly discover that cutting the obscure, slow-moving items is exactly what destroys the reason customers chose an independent store over a big-box retailer in the first place, creating a genuine strategic bind between profitability and the core value proposition. Now let's talk about what happens after you actually open, because the operating bleed at a hardware store never stops moving regardless of foot traffic. Labor costs run higher than a typical retailer because customers expect knowledgeable staff who can actually help diagnose a plumbing problem or recommend the right fastener, not just ring up purchases. Typically 18 to 25% of revenue, compared to 12 to 15% at big box competitors who rely more heavily on self-service. Property taxes and facility costs for a store this size run $40,000 to $90,000 annually. Insurance, covering both the retail operation and the liability exposure of giving customers advice on projects involving electrical work, plumbing, or structural repairs, costs $15,000 to $35,000 a year. Cooperative membership fees and required minimum purchase volumes add another $8,000 to $20,000 annually beyond the initial buy-in. Utilities for a store this size, particularly with the lighting and climate control needed for a large retail floor, run $25,000 to $50,000 a year. Here's the economic reality that will define your entire career in this business. Your gross margins on individual items are actually reasonable, often 35 to 45%, but your overall store margin gets squeezed by the labor and carrying costs required to offer the breadth and expertise that justifies your existence against cheaper big box competition. Here's the part the passive income dream skips entirely, and it's the part that actually explains how independent hardware stores that survive actually make real money. A hardware store does not primarily profit from the commodity items customers can buy anywhere: lumber, basic tools, or standard fasteners priced competitively against big box stores. It profits from the knowledge-driven, high-margin categories where genuine expertise and immediate availability matter more than price: paint mixing and color matching, specialty tools rented rather than purchased, and the emergency purchase, the exact right part needed right now to finish a project already in progress. Understand this. and you understand why surviving independent stores obsess over staff expertise rather than simply competing on price. On a typical commodity item, matching big box pricing to stay competitive, your actual margin is often just 15 to 20%, barely covering your higher labor and carrying costs. The real profit engines are elsewhere. Custom paint mixing and matching, where customers pay for both the product and genuine color matching expertise, generates 50 to 60% margins. Tool and equipment rental, serving customers who need a specific tool for one project rather than owning it forever, generates 65 to 75% margins on equipment that gets rented dozens of times before replacement. And the emergency purchase, the customer who needs one specific fitting immediately to finish a plumbing repair, already underway, will pay full retail price without comparison shopping because the alternative is an unfinished project and an unusable bathroom, generating your highest margins on your lowest cost items. The lumber and fasteners are the product on the surface. The paint counter, the rental department, and the emergency fastener bin underneath are the real business. Now let's follow one typical customer visit and see where the actual profit comes from. A customer comes in for a specific plumbing fitting to finish a repair, a $4 item generating perhaps $1.50 in gross margin, unremarkable on its own. But while there, a knowledgeable staff member helps them identify that their real problem is a failing shutoff valve, leading to an additional $35 sale with a $15 margin because the customer trusts the diagnosis enough to buy the fix immediately rather than researching it themselves. The same customer, mentioning a painting project while checking out, gets steered to the paint counter for a custom-matched gallon at $45, generating $24 in margin. What started as a single $4 commodity purchase actually generates $40–50 in total margin once the knowledge-driven upsell and paint sale are included, 10 times what the original item alone suggested. And that customer, having received genuinely useful expertise, becomes measurably more likely to return for their next project rather than defaulting to the big box store down the road. So let's run two versions of the same hardware store and see how differently this can play out. In the optimistic scenario, your store builds a genuine reputation for staff expertise in your neighborhood. Your paint and rental departments both perform strongly, and steady foot traffic from loyal repeat customers keeps your commodity item sales volume high enough to maintain reasonable inventory turnover. Annual revenue reaches roughly $3.8 million. After cost of goods, labor, facility costs, and cooperative fees totaling $3.4 million, you're clearing approximately $400,000 in annual profit. A genuinely sustainable business that can support a family and eventually be passed to the next generation or sold as a going concern. Now here's the realistic scenario. Using the exact same store, the exact same starting assumptions. A new big box home improvement store opens 12 minutes away, and while you can't match their pricing on commodity items, your commodity sales volume drops 30%, as price-sensitive customers who previously shopped with you out of convenience now make the slightly longer drive for meaningfully lower prices on lumber and basic tools. Simultaneously, rising minimum wage requirements in your state increase your labor costs by 18%, since your knowledgeable staff commands wages above minimum regardless of the mandate, compressing your margin further. Your paint and rental departments hold steady since they depend on expertise the big box store can't replicate, but they can't offset the commodity sales decline. Annual revenue falls to $2.9 million, but your fixed costs, the cooperative membership minimums, the facility lease, and your core staffing levels needed to maintain service quality barely change regardless of foot traffic. That $400,000 optimistic profit doesn't just shrink. It becomes a $95,000 annual loss, and you're now facing the exact strategic bind independent hardware stores have faced for decades. Cutting staff expertise to survive financially undermines the entire reason customers chose you in the first place. The operators who actually survive and thrive in this business long-term aren't the ones who tried to match big box pricing across their entire inventory or who cut staff expertise to preserve margins. They're the ones who leaned aggressively into the categories where genuine knowledge and immediate availability justify premium pricing, who built rental and paint departments into serious profit centers rather than afterthoughts, who accepted thinner margins on commodity items as a customer acquisition cost rather than trying to compete head-on with chains that will always outbuy them. And who understood that inventory breadth itself, even the slow-moving items that look like dead capital on a spreadsheet, is the actual product being sold? A hardware store, at the end of the day, isn't really a retail business selling commodity items at all. It's a knowledge and convenience business wrapped around inventory breadth that big box competitors structurally cannot replicate, where the staffing and category investment decisions made years before a big box competitor ever opens nearby decide who actually survives long enough to remain the neighborhood's trusted store rather than becoming another empty storefront.